All right, Richard Sherman talking about Pete Carroll and his style coaching the Seattle Seahawks, and maybe the message getting a little stale, a little recycled, as he put it there. Mike Silver and Steve Weich, my Aftermath fellows, joining me here on the Frenzy. Guys, let's start there with what you make of Richard Sherman talking about the Seahawks today.
Well, listen, I think Richard Sherman in the end is going to, regard Pete Carroll as a coach he loved playing for. He's obviously transitioning to rival mode right now. And listen, I don't think Pete would necessarily be offended by some of that. I think there's a part of Pete that thinks, I would like to get some young guys and see if I could do this again. Because what they did was monumental. And Steve, I think you'll agree with me here. Some of this traces back to that long yard, or really 2 feet, that they could not get, which would have given them back-to-back Super Bowl championships. And there are Super Bowl losses and there are scars, but this might be the biggest I've ever seen. A team that was so proud and fought so hard and was on the verge of repeat championships, something special. And the way that game ended, and the belief from a lot of guys, Richard Sherman included, that they should have just handed the ball to Marshawn Lynch and taken their chances. That's been hard to shake. And Richard and the Seahawks were not in a good place a year ago. They talked about some trade scenarios. He came back for one more run. But I believe a lot of that traces back to this, Steve.
Well, Mike, that's part of it, but I don't think it's that complicated. Yeah. I mean, I think part of it is this just kind of ran its course. We don't see nucleus as a football team stick together for this long. So they, the fact that they made as long of a run as they did with that defense together, that's almost kind of unseen in the NFL. And I think they sacrificed maybe some other spots, the offensive line and maybe wide receivers, to keep this group together. Now with Richard Sherman, this is him sharpening his edge. We know he's a guy who likes to look places for motivation. He was answering questions about this. But what was interesting, one of the things he said is, I think they're getting curious about younger players. And then he made a reference to, that's like telling us veteran players, like the Pittsburgh Steelers saying, hey, Troy Polamalu is a great player, but let's see what else we have. And that's where it kind of cuts to him, where why would you want to break up such good talent? Now, Sherman in that interview also said, hey, all those guys got hurt. So maybe they're like, well, these guys are getting hurt. They're getting some age on them. Let's break up the band, which is probably what's going on there in Seattle. But I think more than anything, Richard Sherman was not trying to be malicious. But if you know Richard Sherman, some of us know him better than others, this is him holding on to an edge, holding on to motivation. He's upset that people like Joe Thomas, whose podcast he did, were questioning him handling his own contract negotiations. So right now he is building up that sharpened edge on that knife. So when he finally gets on the field, and the Niners told me they expect him back for training camp, he will be ready to rock and roll.
Yeah, Richard
and by
Sherman.
The way, what a great lesson for all of us that Joe Thomas was critical of Richard Sherman. They're both proud, opinionated guys, and they have fan bases that get riled up. And lo and behold, they appeared on a podcast
together and
chopped
hash
it up.
all
It's
out,
amazing.
right?
Mike, what could you be talking about riling up fan bases? I'm sure there's plenty of places in Indianapolis, many folks in Indianapolis right now.
That's your favorite pastime, isn't it?
It's a free agency frenzy.